Okay, now we're gonna go over some tests that I like to order beyond just the basic routine screening. So that would be a complete blood count, a lipid panel, and also a comprehensive metabolic panel. So beyond those things, one thing I like to look at is nutrients. And we cannot look for every nutrient in the body. We can look for some really specific nutrients in a very specific way. And so it's very common that people will come in and say, I just want to know what all my nutrients look like. And there are some specialty labs that do a pretty comprehensive panel on a lot of different nutrients, but we can't test for everything. There just aren't tests available for every nutrient that there is in the body. And they have to be tested in the right way. So some nutrients are reflected inside of red blood cells, some are reflected in the serum, in the plasma. There are just different places in our body that we know how to get a good assessment of those nutrients. The idea that you could take some hair and do a hair mineral analysis and get that information just doesn't make any sense, because nutrient testing is actually quite complicated. But some basic things that we can order through a routine lab would include things like ferritin or serum iron. So I like to look at both those markers for iron storage. Serum iron isn't going to change very fast. You would have to be very deficient in iron for serum iron to be reflected in your blood. However, ferritin, which is a marker of stored iron, will often be deficient much sooner. And sometimes you'll have an iron deficiency before you even see those changes reflected in your red blood cells, like what we're screening for in a CBC to see if there is some type of iron deficiency anemia. There are other types of anemia as well, but that's just one example. So if ferritin is below a 50, that's considered an iron deficiency. And what's interesting is most labs don't even reflect that on their values. That, you know, if you get lab results, if something is abnormal, it's usually flagged by the lab that says, hey, look at this is abnormal. And depending on the lab, ferritin might not even be flagged as abnormal until it's below a 6, I've seen in some cases. So you just have to know as a provider or a patient that if ferritin is below 50, you need to be treated with iron as long as you can tolerate it for a variety of reasons. So my ferritin has come up from an 18 up to a 57 with supplementation over the last couple years. It's a slow process, but I guarantee you will feel more energy, more exercise tolerance. You'll have better oxygenation of your blood. All around, ferritin and stored iron is really helpful for our energy levels. B12 and folate can also be fairly well reflected in the bloodstream. They are interesting because they're actually peripheral markers that will give us a little bit better idea of B12 status. So for example, methylmalonic acid or homocysteine, those are some substances in our body that will build up if we don't have enough of either B12 or folate. And so our blood serum levels of B12 and folate might look normal today because maybe I ate enough food that had some B12 or folate in it, so that today my B12 and folate look good, but maybe I've been consistently deficient throughout. So those other markers will give us a better idea of that, but it's still a useful marker even in the bloodstream, especially because it gives us a good idea of how well we're absorbing nutrients. So if your B12 or folate are very low, it could be a sign that you have some malabsorption issues. So absolutely worth adding in there. I can see mine aren't perfect, and I'm not surprised about that. I kind of slipped off on my B complex that I usually take every day. And, that just happens in life. The thing about B vitamins is because they're water soluble, we kind of have to replenish them every day. We do store a little bit of them, but for the most part, they're a vitamin that we just need to be taking in on an everyday basis. Vitamin D, on the other hand, is a fat-soluble vitamin. So we do store vitamin D. It is something we want to have consistently coming in, but it is something we will store a little bit better than a water-soluble vitamin like B12 or folate. So vitamin D, absolutely essential for energy, immune system, bone formation, mood. I mean, vitamin D is super, super important. And people have a little bit of a different idea of the ideal range. The research just really is conflicting sometimes. So, I don't think we know exactly, but overall, the consensus seems to be that vitamin D in between a 50 and a 70 is a really good place to land for a lot of reasons. Any more than 100, you could be risking some potential toxicity from vitamin D. So I do not recommend getting vitamin D levels up too high. And so really trying to keep that in that sweet spot in between 50 and 70. Mine's come down. It was a 65 and I let it come down to a 35. So, another just good reason to keep up with your routine screening, because even though we have these ideals in life on how we're going to do all these things perfectly, life is just difficult sometimes and we fall off on some of our healthy habits. So by doing our routine screening, we can re-motivate ourselves to dive back into some of those healthy habits and make sure we're supporting our health in as optimal a way as possible. So that's the nutrients that I ordered for this panel. Sometimes I'll order a few more. For example, sometimes I order some magnesium or vitamin C or copper or zinc, but those aren't something I do every single year and for every single person. So hopefully this helps you understand a little bit more about nutrient testing and what I include in my routine screening panel.